Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and today we're going to replace the back glass on the iPhone 11. For this video, we're going to use the back that goes over the camera lens. I'm not going to use the one that goes in the camera lens, so just so you know, that's what we're going to be doing. So the tools we're going to need are going to be a PH000 Bit, a P2 driver, a Y000 Bit, a pick of some sort, a blade, an Xacto Knife like in the description below, some heat, and we'll need some glue, as well as some clamps. We'll also need some protective gear, like glasses for your eyes, and a glove like this to protect from heat and possible damage to your hands. So the first thing we're going to do is grab the P2 driver, remove the bottom two screws, and then we're going to heat up the screen a little bit to lift up the screen so we can take off the screen. I recommend using a razor blade to get into the screen, lift it up just a little bit so then you can get a pick in there, use that pick to cut through the adhesive on the bottom, and then go through the side on the right side and on the left side as well. Then lastly, cut through the adhesive on the top and fold it over to the right like this. Next, we're going to grab the Y000 bit, remove these 5 screws, as well as this little metal panel. Then we're going to unplug the LCD and digitizer cable, as well as the top flex cable, and we can finally remove this screen from the phone. Next, we're going to grab the Y000 bit, and we're going to remove these 3 screws and this metal panel right here, and then we can unplug the battery. And while we're at it, let's remove the SIM card tray, and then we can grab the standoff bit to remove these screws up here. I didn't list the standoff bit, but I do recommend having it just in case. If not, you can just use a small flathead. Then we grab the PH000 bit, remove these screws right here, remembering where this little metal piece on the bottom goes under the SIM card tray. Then we're going to lift up the charging port cable, and we're going to remove this little metal panel that's under it. Then we're going to unplug the SIM card tray and remove that from the phone, as well as all the cables that are down there. Then we're going to go back to the top and we're going to unplug all the cables that we can see, including the camera cables. Then we're going to grab the PH000 bit and remove these screws that cover the cameras. Then you can lift off that metal piece and then carefully lift out the cameras itself. Now we can move these Face ID flex cables, and for some reason this little metal piece kind of stuck to it. If it did, that's fine. You don't have to worry about plugging it in. But if that doesn't happen to you, what you need to do is move up those cables and lift up this metal piece over to the right. But the first thing you want to do is carefully remove the Face ID unit just by pushing down on the left camera, and then it should just kind of fall out. But what we can do is lift up this little metal panel, kind of jiggle it around, and it should come out. But if it doesn't, all you got to do is just unplug these cables right here. And once those are unplugged, we can start lifting up the logic board. I recommend starting with the bottom portion and then just kind of lifting up like this. And as you can see, this little metal panel kind of fell out. It does hook onto the logic board, so I don't know why it's difficult, but it just is. Then we can use a PH000 bit to remove all these bottom screws right here. Make sure to keep them in order, as you should be doing for everything. And we can lift up this little cover right here. Then there's going to be 2 more screws down here, as well as this little metal panel that needs to be moved in place, or out of place in this case. Next, we can unplug the Taptic engine and actually remove that. Then we want to grab the standoff bit and remove the screws that we can see right here, and remove this little plastic piece and put that in place. Next, we can remove the bottom speaker and set that over to the side. Then we can grab the PH000 bit and remove these bottom 2 screws that hold in the charging port. Maybe a little bit difficult to remove, but it's not going to be the worst thing. Then we can carefully lift up this charging port cable. Feel free to add heat if you need to. I recommend starting at the top and then using a razor blade to separate the little plastic pieces that are stuck onto the frame. You want to remove those rather than the microphones because it's definitely easier to do, and also you have less risk of actually tearing those microphones by doing that. Once those are loose, the charging port should just kind of come out fairly easily. Just be careful on the left side because there are some delicate cables. Once that comes out, we can just set that down like this. And then we can start removing the battery, which means we have to use these pull tabs on the bottom and carefully try to remove it. If they do tear, don't really worry too much because the ones on the top are going to be a pain either way. You can try and carefully remove those, but again, remember not to use any metal or anything like that to lift up these pieces, because damaging the battery with a metal tool is definitely the worst thing you can do on a battery. So I recommend using a plastic pick to kind of lift up this adhesive, but it will be a pain, so eventually you get to the point where you're just going to add some heat on the areas where the pull tabs broke, and carefully lift up the battery. Remember not to add too much heat, but also remember we are going to add a lot of heat to this back, so don't really worry too much, just more of worrying about the battery. Then we can just easily pull off this adhesive because we're not going to need it. Next thing we're going to do is remove the wireless charging, and we're going to carefully use a blade to kind of cut through this and lift up this little black piece. And once we lift it up a decent amount so we can actually see the coil, we're going to use a pick to get under the coil to cut through the rest of the adhesive. That way we can preserve the wireless charging. You can use heat if you want to, probably makes it easier, but I personally don't use heat on this one. Now the next thing we want to do is grab the Y000 bit and remove these screws on the top, and then grab the PH000 bit and remove these screws on the top, including these ones at the very top. Then what we're going to do is lift up this cable and remove it. It is plugged in, so you can just loosen that up and it should come out. Now there's going to be these antennas, which I personally didn't really know how it came out when I was doing this repair. So what you want to do is you actually want to loosen up those antennas right there, including the one on the top. And it should just come out. There's a little bit of adhesive that's stuck onto this and the volume button plug, but it's not connected in any other way. So you could just add a little bit of heat and loosen that up or remove these antennas if you want to. I didn't know that until later on, but either way, doing that will definitely lower the risk of tearing these cables. Now to get to the camera flash area, we need to remove this little cover over the screw, which is a little bit weird. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab the Y000 bit, remove this screw on the side, and the PH000 bit, and remove that screw that was covered. Then this little metal panel piece should just come off like that. Remember that it goes in on the left side and then screws in on the right sides. Then we can carefully try and remove this little camera flash area. We're not going to actually remove it from the phone, but we are going to lift it from the phone. It's just held in by some adhesive, so just be careful not to tear anything. And then we're just going to carefully fold it over like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab some Kapton tape, or pretty much some heat resistant tape, and we're going to put some on the actual phone itself. And then we're going to put it over that camera flash and the microphone as well to make sure that when we are heating this, we don't overheat it or melt it. And again, remove this antenna, don't set it down like I did. And now we can remove all of this other stuff because there is going to be a lot of glass flying everywhere. So time to get those glasses and something to protect you from some heat. So what we're going to do is we're just going to heat up the phone. So what I recommend is just kind of getting like a base coat of heat, if that makes sense. Just heat up all areas of the phone, and then what you want to do after about 10-15 seconds is just focus on an area where you're going to start. So generally I like to focus on the bottom, and I like to keep the heat gun there for about 5 to 10 seconds, depending on what type of heat I'm using, or how much heat I'm using. Then what we're going to do is we're going to grab a razor blade, and we're going to try and lift up the glass just a little bit. Sometimes it comes out very easily, other times it is going to be a little bit difficult for it to come out. And that's generally how it's going to be in the beginning, but once the phone gets like a nice coat of heat going through it, it's going to be a little bit easier to remove this glass. Also, using the razor blade isn't really the best option. But ultimately what we want to do is we want to keep doing this over and over again until we can get a decent amount of space so we can use the Xacto knife to do the rest of the job. And that's exactly what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do is just heat up the area where I want to remove the glass and get the Xacto knife in there, and it should feel fairly easy to start removing it. Again, like I've been saying, as the phone starts to heat up, it is going to be easier and easier to actually get under there. So once you start getting the feel of it, you're going to know how much resistance is what, and you're going to know when to add more heat. There is a plastic trim going around this phone, so make sure not to add too much heat, but it is very difficult to melt that. Also, we can't replace that trim, so make sure not to melt it. But ultimately what I like to do is I like to use the Xacto knife for the stuff in the middle, and then I like to use a razor blade for the stuff on the edges. Because what happens is if it slips, you could cut through that little plastic piece, and that's just going to be annoying. However, with the razor blade, it's a lot harder to do that. So pretty much what I'm going to do is just heat up the corners and cut through the adhesive. And then once we get through the bottom stuff, we're just going to go up to the top right. And as I get to the top right, you can see this little antenna fell out because I added a lot of heat, and it loosened up from the volume button flex cables. So like I said, it does just fall out. But still, this cable does hang out a little bit, so be careful around that. And now we can continue removing the glass. Now, once we get to the camera lens, it gets a little bit difficult to do because this area does not come out very easily. It's actually a really annoying job. So what I recommend doing is trying to get something to kind of just break the rest of the glass. It's going to get really difficult. But you want to focus on breaking the glass so then you can just carefully pick it out with the razor blade. But eventually this stuff will fall out and you'll figure out how to do it. But obviously make sure not to damage the camera lenses, and also make sure that the little metal piece isn't damaged too much, or else that can just be more work for you. Also, if that microphone thing didn't fall out very easily when you were taking it off, make sure to be very careful and remember where that goes. And now we've pretty much reached the fun part where we have to remove all the adhesive around the camera area and around the side of the phone. So the camera area is very difficult and very annoying to do, but I'll show you a little bit. What I like to do is I like to put it under a microscope. And if you have one of these, that's awesome. That's going to make your life a little bit easier. But if not, I just use this for having better precision with cutting the glass and getting rid of the rest of the adhesive. This will take some time, so be careful. And again, like I just said, take your time. Same thing with the glass on the side. It may get a little bit difficult and it may get a little bit messy, so make sure you have a clean desk and make sure there's nothing that can accidentally cut someone else. But after you're ready, clean up your desk if you haven't already. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove the adhesive that goes around the frame. You don't really have to worry too much about that, but there is a lot of glue and glass that did get stuck on there, so I'm just going to remove that. Because what I like to do is I like to put the screen on the phone, so then it has a little bit more area to kind of hold the back in place. So once everything is clean and flat and everything looks nice, perfect for the new back, you can test it on there, make sure that it looks nice. What we're going to do is add this glue around the edge, so pretty much around the green area where you see on this phone because it's a green phone. And we're going to do it around the little metal piece like this. I added way too much. You don't have to add this much. You can add maybe half of what I did on the metal piece, and then add just a little bit around the camera area. But either way, it's going to hold well. It's just going to be a little bit difficult to clean up after you're done. So what I like to do is once I set down the back, I like to add a clamp on one side. When I line it up, line up the other side, add a clamp, line up pretty much every side, add a clamp. And then on the right and left side, I like to make sure that the glass is actually sitting on there. It's not like over the edge or anything like that, so it feels perfect. And then pretty much what you want to do is add 5 to 6 clamps on the right side, 5 to 6 clamps on the left side, and then 1 or 2 on the top and bottom area. Unlike my other videos, this one is not overkill. Then we're going to let this sit for about 3 hours, but the longer the better, so especially if you can let it sit overnight. And once we're done, we can just remove this extra adhesive that's on the edges with either a fingernail or a pick or something like that. You don't need anything metal. You can use rubbing alcohol to make it a little bit easier to remove, but this glue is actually not that bad and actually fairly easy to remove. But once it feels nice, or if you want to clean it up later, we can just remove this screen right here. Make sure to carefully remove it because there could be some glue that sticks onto the cables, but in this case, there wasn't. So the first thing I'm going to do is carefully put this microphone metal piece back in place. Then I'm going to carefully remove the tape so we can set the microphone and the camera flash back in place. And then we're going to get all these little parts and we're going to start putting everything back together. So if you know what you're doing, feel free to just skip through to the end because, well, we're pretty much done actually. But ultimately, we're going to put this little metal piece starting with the left side, fold over to the right side, put the PH000 screw on the top and then the Y000 screw on the bottom. Put that antenna back in place, as well as the other antenna that goes on top of it, and all the screws that go in there. Make sure these little metal pieces go in place because they do touch certain parts of the phone and they could cause some issues. Not really too sure if they cause issues, but just in case, make sure they're going in the right direction. Now we can plug in the charging port. I recommend pushing in the charging port where that area goes. Then we're just going to grab the PH000 screws and put those in. Then we can push those microphones in place and we can set this little plastic piece right here and use the standoff bit to put that plastic piece in place. That'll also help for holding in the microphone, as well as the other standoff screw right there. Put in this bottom speaker and then put in those bottom 2 standoff bits. We can fold over this little microphone area as well as this little cable over here and use a PH000 bit to start putting in those screws that go in those places. Next, you can plug in the Taptic engine as well as those screws that go in that place as well, and that little metal cover and those bottom 2 screws that go into that metal cover and the speaker area. While you're at it, you might as well put that little black cover over the cover. Then we have this bottom antenna where we can just set down in place and put in those screws that go in the right place as well. Then we're done with the charging port area. And right now I'm going to put in the Face ID, just makes it a little bit easier. Make sure it's lined up on the right side and then lined up on the left side. And the easiest way to know is if you try and lift up the right side, it won't lift up. And if that happens and then you try and lift up the right side, then you know you plugged it in properly. Then we can put the logic board back in place, making sure to remove any of the cables out of the way and then remembering that that little metal piece does go on top of there. Hopefully you put that over to the side and remembered it. Once everything's lined up, plug in those little cables on the top and then put that little metal piece on starting with the right side and then fold it over. Then we can plug in the Face ID cables that go over there to kind of hold that little metal piece in temporarily. And then we can put in these standoff screws on the top. But I did forget to put the wireless charging in there, so you can actually kind of wiggle it into place if you don't put in that bottom screw just yet. And remember to plug in the wireless charging just to make sure you have it lined up. Then we can plug in one of the charging port cables, not the left one, just the right one. Then we want to maneuver this SIM card tray back in place like this, and then push down on the right side to kind of line it up properly. Now we can grab the PH000 bit, put the screw on the right side, and then we can put the one on the bottom right side as well with that little metal piece that goes there. Remember, it is pointing down. Now make sure all those cables are plugged in, and we can put this little metal piece right here and then put in the PH000 bit screw on the bottom left and then that standoff bit on the right. Then we can plug in the charging port carefully, make sure you don't damage anything. And now we're ready for the cameras. Make sure to get rid of any dust and dirt or anything like that that is in there. It looks like I had some, so I did that. And now it looks fine and it's ready to go. So just set that back in place, plug in those cables. And you can put the cover on right now, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the battery. So I'm just going to add 2 strips of adhesive on the bottom and on the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in the battery to line it up in place. And once everything is lined up properly, we're going to unplug the battery. Now the next thing is we're going to put this little cover over the camera. It kind of lines up like slotted on the right side and then it just folds down. So make sure to install that properly and then grab the PH000 screws and put in the one on the top and the one on the bottom. And while we're at it, let's put in that SIM card tray. And what we're going to do is I'm going to put some new adhesive on this phone because I am, 1, replacing the screen, and 2, I removed all the adhesive around it. In this case, I got very lucky and it kind of just came off easily, but sometimes it could be a pain, and I recommend buying like 2 or 3 of these. Also, doing the back glass, the phone isn't really water resistant. I'm just using this so then the screen actually stays down properly, because those bottom 2 screws and the clamps don't generally hold it in properly. But either way, we're ready to put the phone back together, so we're going to plug in the top cable, we're going to plug in the LCD and digitizer cable, as well as the battery. And we're going to test, make sure it's good, and so far it looks good. So what I'm going to do is carefully move up the screen so that it stays plugged in. You can unplug it if you want to, but make sure to unplug the battery first. Then we're going to put this metal panel on top, and we're going to put in those screws that go over the battery. Next, we're going to slide the screen down just a little bit, put that metal panel over the screen area, and those 3 screws on the left and the 2 screws on the right, all with the Y000 bit. And while the phone's on, we might as well test to make sure it's good, and it looks like it's good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push down on the screen, make sure the adhesive catches, and make sure all these clamps touch. And everything looks good, so we can put the bottom 2 screws back in place with the P2 driver. And that's it. All you got to do is just clean up the rest of the adhesive, but if you've already done that, then you've already done your job. Hopefully this video helped you out. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section or message me on Twitter. I get bored over there. And feel free to follow me on the social media listed above. Subscribe to my channel so you can see more repair and some review videos as well. And hit that bell button so then YouTube reminds you when those videos do come out. Thanks for watching.